Hello all, this is Pranav from DFII India office. Hope you all can see my screen. And I welcome you all to this DFII India Groundwork 2022 webinar 2. So a few quick instructions. Recording of this webinar is prohibited. Participation certificates will be emailed in approximately 2 weeks time, and I request all the attendees to kindly mute yourself this time to increase the interaction with speakers. We have put all the attendees into our Zoom call, but I request you all to kindly mute yourself. And this webinar recording will be uploading on our YouTube channel, so you can check that out in approximately 2 weeks time. So now I'll welcome our session moderator for today. So Professor Bhuminathan, he is chair of this Groundwork India committee. So we should all thank him for bringing out these webinars in Groundwork series. He's also retired professor of geotechnical engineering from IIT Madras. Professor Bhuminathan is an active academician, researcher and consultant. His expertise includes soil dynamics and earthquake geotechnical engineering, deep foundations and ground improvement. He has guided 16 PhD kindly mute yourself, everyone. And he has authored over 196 scientific publications, including over 62 articles in the referred journals. He is a fellow of many professional bodies and a member of several technical committees of the International ISSMG. He has also received many awards, including IGS 3 MS Chain Biennial Prize in 2004 and IGS Professor C.S. Desai Biannual Prize in 2011. Recently, he has also been awarded by IGS for ASRR Disaster Prevention Award, that is from IIT Roorkee. So I welcome you, Professor Bhuminathan. I now request you to kindly take this session forward.
Thank you, Pranav, for kind introduction. Dear Dr. Barnali Ghosh and participants, good afternoon and good morning to all of you. On behalf of the DFII India Student Chapter Groundwork, I cordially welcome to all of you for the second webinar of this year 2022. You can see that we have registration from 9 countries throughout the world. I welcome all the participants. And the sequence of the seminar, first I will shortly introduce the Dr. Barnali Ghosh, and we should be presenting about 40 to 45 minutes, and followed by a question and answer session, and we have closing remarks. So finally, some details about the upcoming programs of DFII, as well as call for extract of the 2022 conference. Of course, Dr. Barnali is a well-known expert. No need for introduction. Anyway, for the benefit of the student community, I briefly introduce her. Of course, first I met her in Berkeley, California, in 2004, actually, during the International Conference on Earthquake Geotechnical Engineering. Of course, that time she was studying PhD at Cambridge University. Of course, I have listened to her presentation also. It was well received at that time by all the participants. Later, I met her in New York, as well as Alexandria, Egypt, Kolkata, and other places also. She also visited Chennai, actually, and presented seminar in our IIT Madras for civil engineering faculty and students. So, Dr. Barnali currently a technical director at Mott MacDonald, and also a fellow at Institute of Civil Engineer, FIC. She's a chartered civil engineer with specialization in earthquake geotechnical engineering through her PhD at Cambridge University. And she has acted As lead geoseismic specialist in several prestige projects across the world, she is often tasked with producing basis for design documents for different onshore, offshore projects. She has a strong academic background with practical experience in delivering value to the clients in understanding and mitigating seismic hazard in their project, and manages the seismic skills discussion group within Mott MacDonald. And she has been part of the earthquake field investigation team following the Nepal earthquake in 2015. And she has recently selected among the top 50 women in engineering in UK in 2020. She is the international winner of 2017 Samsat Prakash Award for Excellence in Geotechnical Earthquake Engineering Practice, actually. So with this brief introduction, I welcome Dr. Barnali Ghosh to give a talk on how can engineers of tomorrow contribute to the sustainable development.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Bhuminatham. I'm going to try and share my screen, and hopefully the technology will work. Yes, let's see. Can somebody confirm if you can see my screen?
Yes, yes.
Okay, that's great. So at least we've crossed the first hurdle that any presentation has, that's the technology. So the technology part is now sorted. Thank you, DFI India student, DFI, for inviting me to give this talk. Although I have been out of the country for more than 20 years now, but I have maintained my connections with India, and I always, whenever there is a chance to speak to students in India, I always take this opportunity, despite the fact that I may be very busy, because I think that it's very, very important that students who are doing geotechnical engineering or civil engineering at the moment, you should hear the stories of what you are studying, how it contributes to sustainable development. Now, at the moment, everybody is talking about sustainable development, but what we do not see enough is really what are the real projects? How does it so there is a lot of noise about sustainable development, but what I want to do in the next 30-40 minutes is to sort of break it down and kind of show you examples where actually the sustainable development really has been helpful, or you've actually done something for society. So that's how I'm going to structure my talks.
You find an excuse.
So just to go through some of the things that I will be covering, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the context. I will, as you've heard, all my life I worked with earthquakes, so I always joke that I love things when they shake, and that is the story of a seismic engineer. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the challenges and then leave you with some last thoughts. I hope because I thought I was primarily talking to students, so I tried to keep the technical content to a sort of medium level so that it's clear to everyone and it's accessible to everyone. Okay, now everybody probably is aware of these UN Sustainable Goals. Now, what are these UN Sustainable Goals? The UN Sustainable Goals are an internationally recognized framework for delivering sustainable development for all countries. So this was quite a landmark because every country of the world agreed on these UN Sustainable Goals. And these goals are very, very universal. For example, you can say that some of these goals are aspirational, but some of these goals are also very much realistic. And this is what, as your role as an engineer, you will be striving to achieve. Now, let's talk about some of the very important goals. For example, if you look at number 6, which is clean water and sanitation, this is what water engineers are doing all the time. So you are already fulfilling sustainable goal number 6. Second, if you look at goal number 11, sustainable cities and communities, then that is also something which is being done in many sustainable projects. Climate action, 13, you've been hearing about all the noise about climate change and how it affects fisheries. So all of these sustainable goals, now whenever we do any project in any part of the world, one of the key things for us to check which of these sustainable goals are this project's fearing. So I would advise everybody to look at the sustainable development goals in web, understand them. There's a very nice website where you can learn a lot about these and make these a part of your everyday thinking. So not all projects will achieve these goals all the time. So you can really break them down further into some of the direct benefits, and in addition to some of indirect benefits and some ripple effects. So some of the direct benefits could be the goal number 3, which is which can be different type of goals. Goal number 6, goal number 7, goal number 9, goal number 13, which is could be all direct benefits. Then you can go to some of the indirect benefits, which could be gender equality, which could be clean sanitation, water. So there's many of these indirect effects. And finally, there are other goals which are ripple effects. So essentially, the whole purpose of showing these goals to you is to make you aware of these sustainable goals and to allow everyone to think about these sustainable goals. So what is our engineering purpose? I know when we are students, we often forget why we are studying engineering. So essentially, it's this is the purpose that we have at Mott MacDonald where I work, but it's also the engineering purpose for many other companies of the world. So if you read this carefully, what it says, it is to improve society by considering social outcomes in everything we do. We as engineers are in a very powerful position because we can consider social outcomes, relentlessly focusing on excellence. So essentially, whatever we tend to do has to be excellent, and digital innovation, because the world is moving towards digital innovation at the moment. So we should really be following the digital innovation, transforming our clients, businesses, our communities, and employee opportunities. So essentially, we should be talking about our clients. We should do work which is really good for our clients, for our communities. So essentially, at the moment, what I'm going to try and touch to you is show you some examples of how the work that we do has an effect on our communities. And obviously, at the end of the day, we should feel happy about our job as engineers. So essentially, why are we so much worried about society? Because as you saw in the video earlier, these days, infrastructure is very complex. For example, I'm just showing you a sketch from a project in which you have some existing buildings. You're trying to build some tunnels. On top of that, there is some new viaduct. So there is a complex interfacing between tunnels, buildings, viaducts, and the built environment. So as trying to remember about social outcomes, we have to be aware of this complex interfacing and use these in our design. So every engineer, as an engineer, you cannot work very silo and not care about what is happening with other aspects of this. And through the example that I will share with you, it will become very clear to you why I am talking about interfaces. So as an engineer, you have an ability to influence different sections of the world and different type of work. For example, you could be involved in a project which is in buildings, communication, power, education, environment, international development, transport. And as a seismic engineer, I'm fortunate that I can work on all these sectors, because in every sector, if there is an earthquake, you are called upon to do some work there. So you can actually work on each and every sector if you decide to follow earthquake engineering as your specialty. And for example, foundations and geotechnical engineering is also required for most of the structures. So you're really pretty important. So what is my motivation? Well, I have been doing earthquake engineering for 20 years, and my really main motivation is to help to design a safer, sustainable, resilient world. All the pictures that I see around me are around this kind of disasters which happen after every earthquake. And so how do we use our knowledge to ensure that such kind of disasters are minimized, or in case even if you have an earthquake, the damage is minimal? That's what we are trying to achieve. Because this is what I like this, because this was after the New Zealand earthquake. This was a couple who were just, this is the house that they had built their whole personal life, and then they could not. So essentially, few minutes of shaking, and that they had lost the house that they had built. So you can no more win a war than you can win an earthquake. That is what a good design will do. If the structure had been designed properly, if all the earthquake resistant methodologies had been adopted, then obviously the chances of such a disaster happening would be minimal. And that is why, as engineers, it is our responsibility to do good design, because you are really playing with lives of people. So now I'm going to, after giving you some context, I'm going to give you a case study. There are different types of case studies I could have presented. There are some very high-end case studies in the sense that the solutions are expensive. But what I wanted to, because I'm speaking primarily to the student audience, I wanted to kind of enhance to you that how there are some low-cost solutions which just needs us to think a little bit creatively, and they can also be equally effective. Okay, I'm going to talk about a particular earthquake, which is called as the Palu earthquake. This earthquake happened in 2018 on the 28th of September. It was in the news because something was seen in the earthquake which was not seen before. So this earthquake was a high magnitude earthquake. It was a 7.5 magnitude earthquake. It was a very, very shallow earthquake. It was just 15 kilometers, and it killed about 5,000 people, 4,845 people. But it displaced a large number of people. 200,000 people were displaced. Now, why this earthquake is so, it just threw the world community of earthquake engineers off the ground, and people published loads and loads of paper about this earthquake, because something happened in this earthquake which was completely, totally unknown before. So if you Google Palu earthquake in YouTube, you can see some very, very dramatic videos. There were some flow slides which traveled a long distance, and there were huge ground displacements. So essentially, everything that's associated with an earthquake, which is tsunamis, liquefaction, waterfront landslide, surface fault rupture, everything happened following this earthquake. And there was a tsunami which occurred minutes after the quake. So the early warning system did not work, leading to 9 meters of maximum runoff. So everything that could have happened, and it occurred in the area of Palu city, which is, if I'm just showing it in the map here. This one, I think you can see the red building is quite popular. This is a YouTube, this video, where it looks like as if the red building is moving. But actually, it's not the red building which is moving. It's just the cameraman is moving. It gave the impression. I have got a better video, which will get a better feel of what I'm trying to express. I need to go to the next slide. So this earthquake, as we just discussed, this earthquake as magnitude, you can see some other pictures of this earthquake. Now, why did this earthquake become so different from all the earthquakes that we've known in the past? Because it destroyed a lot of land. 10,000 hectares of crops were damaged because of this earthquake. And this is what is the social outcome, because this happened at a time where people use that land for irrigation. Now, Indonesia is a primarily agricultural community. So the 10,000 hectares of land that was destroyed meant people could not do any irrigation. So this is the location again. This is the map of Indonesia, and in Indonesia there is an irrigation system. This irrigation is called as Gumbasa irrigation system. We're going to talk about Gumbasa. This Actually, this irrigation system helps about 8,000 hectares of land, and it provides water. This irrigation system provides water to 5,000 farmers. Because of the earthquake, this canal, irrigation canal, completely breached, which meant that 5,000 farmers had no water to irrigate their land. This is a much better view. So this actually was not, this is also showing you the power of technology, because this was recreated by researchers after using several GIS images. Now, if I just show it, you can view this. Look at the flow. That's the canal. What you see in white is the canal here, the water that we talked about. And that's the amount of flow that's happening. The interesting thing about this flow was it was happening on something, on a ground which did not have a big slope. It was a very gentle sloping ground. But if I just play it once again, you can see that it just seems like strange forces of nature is driving. So what drove this? Why did it move so fast? Why did it move about 500 meters or more? This is not something, this has been seen in the past in other earthquakes, like in San Fernando or something. But in those cases, there were different drivers and there was a slope, and it wasn't such a gentle slope. So researchers tried to publish this with several papers to understand what is the reason for this. And there's still no consensus, actually, what drove it. So this is what you see here is the entire irrigation canal. There were some big areas which were lost. So the one which was lost, the biggest, was the Jongogé liquefaction, 210 hectares. If you go in Google Earth now and look at this, the image, the ground is still the same. You can see the kind of failures that I showed you. You can still see the failures, similar failures there as well. Nothing has been done since 2018. The canal is not restored. 5,000 farmers are out of water. They cannot do any irrigation. This is some of the other pictures just to look at just what happened after the earthquake. You can see the canal lost all its water, so it's a dry canal at the moment. And the ground that you can see the failures that we were seeing earlier is examples of all dry, and that's the kind of damage. So after this, a lot of people said it was liquefaction which drove this failure. So then what is liquefaction? It's just a crash course in liquefaction, because sometimes as an engineer, you have to talk to people who may not have the technical expertise to understand the complex terms. In that case, we need to simplify our language. So the question is, what is liquefaction? Well, you know that in an earthquake, the ground shakes. Sometimes the ground is made up of such material where when you generate the excess pour water pressures, there is not enough time for the pressure to dissipate. And so finally, it looks like you are sitting in a sort of a soup. Now, for example, this man who has parked his car in the night, and after the earthquake, this is the position in which he finds his car, because the ground around has become like soup. And liquefaction has been responsible for many, many dramatic case histories in the past. But was this case really liquefaction, or was it something else? Was it a combination of something else? Now, just to try and explain liquefaction in a much more simpler term, but what are the kind of soils which can liquefy? Mostly people say it's the sands, loose, wet sands, and sandy silts are at high risk soils. Whereas even though clay will have some liquefaction, but it is a different type of mechanism. So for people trying to understand liquefaction, maybe the first thing is to look at the ground and see, is there a risk that you have sandy soils which has a chance of liquefaction? And if it does have a chance of liquefaction, what can we do to remediate it? So the situation in Gumbasa after the earthquake was that the main canal, it had large number of cracks along the parts of the canal. And at liquefaction damage areas, remember I showed you 3 liquefaction damage areas. In these areas, the structure of the main canal is severely affected. There were lots of secondary canals, which almost all the canals were built in masonry and are damaged at certain locations. For example, the total river crossings were damaged, so there were widespread damage. And the most difficult part was the farm that was lost, because That's about, you lost about 200 hectares in Jong-Oge, in Shibalya, you lost about 54 hectares, and Petabo 156 hectares. So these are real damages. These are not numbers that's just been pulled out. This is actually that this much of land has become unused for irrigation. What can you do about it? Well, there was a project that the Asian Development Bank set out, which looked at the emergency assistance and rehabilitation and reconstruction of Gumbasa irrigation project. So essentially, we at Mott MacDonald's, we started working on this project just before COVID struck in March 2020. So obviously, as an engineer, when you want to go and work and look at the damage, what has happened, we could not do that. Why? Because of COVID, all travel restrictions. So all of this project has been delivered remotely, but we were supported by a local team in Gumbasa who helped us. But some of the project outputs is that the water resource infrastructure reconstructed, rehabilitated, and upgraded. So we have to get this canal back in action, because otherwise the farmers will not have what they're looking for. And why is it so important? This project became a national project in Indonesia. You can see the Indonesian president. Why? Because rice, all the ground around, they grew rice. And rice is, Indonesia is the third largest rice producer in the world. It produces about 32 to 34 million tons per year. And rice is a key political issue. So for example, elections are fought on the context of rice. And 95% of the country's rice production is from the irrigated land, and you've lost a lot of ground. So I've sat in meetings where the discussion of this has been, this is a national prestige project and we need to get it back. So this is how it looked before the earthquake. It's important to know how it looked before the earthquake. You can clearly see the canal. You can see the weir structure, and that's how it was used for irrigating the parts. Even before the earthquake, there were challenges. Obviously, that there were changing weather patterns, there were droughts, sea level rise, and this is managed by several institutions, this irrigation canal. So there were difficulties there. One of the other difficulties was that it's an aging infrastructure. And a lot of lands were taken away because of urban development. So it's not that the earthquake came and destroyed the canal completely. Even before the earthquake, there were challenges, but it just the earthquake just made it very worse. And since 2018, we are now in 2022. So it's still in the similar situation. So what could we do? We could not go to site, but we had to know what was happening in the site. So this is where technology comes in. We started using a drone. And one of the first things that the drone did was to look at the damage inventory, looking all around the site and looking at what's exactly happened to the irrigation system, which parts of the irrigation system has actually been damaged, and what can we do for removing those damages. So we used this drone and it gave us a good picture of the damage inventory. Now, you have to develop a solution. Our brief was use something called build back better. So essentially remediate the canal, but do it in such a way that it is better than before. So the key objective is to get the canal back operational at a short time and reasonable cost. We cannot say that, of course, there are many, many solutions, but some of the solutions might be very, very expensive. So how do you develop a solution where it is cheap, where you can do it quickly, and it also serves the purpose? So what we thought about was that the canal should have affordable resilience to future earthquakes and ground movements. So any solution that we develop should focus on resistance and resilience. These are two different terms. Resistance means the ability to face an earthquake, whereas resilience is something which you can see in the picture, which says, when something strikes you, do you bend your back or do you absorb the energy and recover quickly? That is resilience. I mean, we all know the word resilience, which when we fell down in our lives and we've just kind of got back to situation. That's resilience. So in the same way, infrastructures, they need to have resistance as well as resilience. Now, just to talk a little bit or to spend a few minutes on this, you will hear a lot of resilience solutions, but resilience, in my opinion, means both adaptation as well as mitigation. Now, what does that mean? What it means is that mitigation is about avoiding the impacts of future earthquake through developing resistance in the system. So for example, if your ground is liquefiable, you can have stone columns, and that is mitigation. But what is resilience? Resilience is about responding to future impacts of earthquake risk in the shortest possible time. So not necessarily mitigation and resilience are same. There is a fine, subtle difference between them, which we need to understand. And essentially, the important thing is that both mitigation and resilience are mutually reinforcing. So obviously, we thought about this very, very carefully, and it was not just something which just geotechnical engineers on their own were specialists. We spoke to people who are expert in developing resilient solutions. So such kind of project always needs a very large team. You cannot conquer everything on your own. Now, the question is, but some of you might ask, what was the seismic hazard at the site? Well, you can see these kinds of maps which are developed, which are known as seismic hazard maps. And from this, Palu City is in red, and Palu City has a peak ground acceleration of about 0.4 to 0.45 G. So this is obviously what it means. It's highly seismic. If you just look at the number, it's somewhat similar to some of the hazards that we would find in very highly seismic places of the world. Parts of Japan would be having this Pacific Ring of Fire with the areas where we would have similar type of acceleration. So it's no doubt that it is a highly seismic area. So it's no doubt that you were a highly seismic area. And what happened was, as people were doing irrigation, this irrigation was actually, rice uses a lot of water. So the land became completely waterlogged. So you have a waterlogged sandy soil, and an earthquake strikes, you have the classic liquefaction. But why did it travel so far? Now, another interesting aspect was that the canals are normally lined, but this canal was an unlined canal, so there was no lining. Why do you not line? I think there are many unlined canals in India as well. The reason why some of the older canals are unlined, mainly because when you leave it, it's just the cost part of it. So if you the picture on the left is a picture of the canal as it is parts of the canal which was remediated, and this is how it's looking now. So what we did was we suggested that precast concrete lining should be used in the canal. And this precast concrete lining is essentially, gives it the stability. It will stop the seepage of water. That was the most important aspect, to stop the seepage of water so that water could contain and water can be used in true proper ways by the fields. So this is the first suggestion that we gave, was to line the canal. So we just said that you have to line the canal. We cannot have unlined canal, because in future, if another earthquake strikes, you will have the same type of damage. What was the other options that you could do? Well, one of the solutions, this is an optioneering study at the beginning of the project, which we were thinking. One of the other options could be maybe make the canal in a pipe. So you could just have HDPE pipe canal and then use stone columns to reinforce the ground. So the problem of risk becomes much less, because all the water is passing through this pipe now. You bury the pipe or you can leave it on the surface. But what is the problem with this solution? This is a very good solution actually. But the problem with this solution is that it is very expensive, because you're going to have pipe canals and soil stone columns to reinforce the ground. So it's very expensive. And but in terms of, if you remember what I said, that we should have resistance as well as resilience, this is a very good solution because it gives you both resistance as well as resilience. So we developed a solution priority list, and in our priority list, this was one of the top solutions. But obviously, when you come back to cost, this was not the most cost-effective solution. What about this thing? This came from structural engineers. Structural engineers, they always like to put things in structures, and they designed this and said, okay, why don't we build like an aqueduct? For example, where you have a pier, which is a deep foundation, and then you have a caisson foundation, and then all of this is through an open canal made in concrete. So that's the kind of solution, pier and caisson. People in the audience can easily say it's a good solution, but then there are some negative aspects of this solution as well. And perhaps one of the things that might be that we know in earthquakes, the pier, what happens if the pier damages? What happens if there is a foundation failure? Then we are again making the solution in such a way that it is going to affect what's happening in future. So that's that kind of solution. This is a good solution, but we did not score it very high, mainly because we thought that this kind of solution is introducing more complexities in terms of construction, in terms of cost, in terms of optioneering. It was a good solution, but not the most remarkable solution. So what is the most remarkable solution? Now you might say that maybe this is okay, but is this the most remarkable solution? Again, I just told in the beginning of my talk that we should be looking at social outcomes in everything that we do. We should look at sustainability in what we do. So what is this solution? This solution said, okay, we did a very good detailed investigation of the ground, and we found that the ground is really very complicated because it has a history. And what you see in brown are the slip surfaces. These are predefined small strength layers which are hidden in the ground. And the failure happened because of these predefined failure surfaces which were already there. So what we said, let's excavate the ground till the level where you come and hit the slipped area from where it has slipped. And then use the green material, which is the backfill material, which we use from the locally excavated material. So that is again reusing the material. That's where the sustainability comes in. And then to provide some additional resistance, let's use geotextile. Geotextiles are low cost and they may have a much better resistance. In a sense, what we did is then to provide some drainage, because we know that water is a problem. You have some crushed rock to reduce the failure of the slope surfaces. Now, this is a geotechnical solution. Is this the best solution? Well, if you consider the fact that that in this solution, you are reusing the local material, you are actually using geotextiles, and in terms of that, you also have a lot of vegetation. So the 3D image kind of shows you what we were trying to do, introducing a lot of vegetations, lot of benching around in such a way that even in future, if such a failure does occur, the damage is minimal. Now this solution, I'm just going to repeat it once again, this solution is not the solution which says that such a failure will never occur. And it took us a long time to kind of convince everyone that this solution gives you a certain level of protection, that yes, you will not have a dramatic type of failure that you had in the past, but there's still some chance that some damage will occur, but that should be a repairable damage. And so in this solution, the main difference, we ran a lot of analysis using slope stability programs to see what kind of factors of safety. I'm not getting into the technical. Obviously, what I'm showing you is kind of a very, very high level definition, or high level for this solution. I haven't really gone into a lot of detail into how the design studies developed and other things, but just for what I am trying to tell you today is that as you're trying to develop solutions, it's important to keep the sustainability fact into mind. Well, obviously, as I said, it happened when COVID struck, so the original plan was that we would do some site investigation and then we would get the parameters and use them for design. But because of COVID, everything got delayed. So we were in a situation where we developed the design first based on our understanding of the site. And then once the design was finished, we had some site investigation. So what you see in the screen are the pictures from the site investigation. And here we had a local team, we employed local site investigation team, and we supervised it remotely again. And we had some of our staff from our local Indonesian office who were there. There were lots of meetings with stakeholders because ultimately this is a facility for local people. They should have a say on how this facility should be run in future. And parts of the site investigation results were, we were just hoping and praying that the results of site investigation confirm what our assumptions were in design. And thankfully, we were lucky that we had estimated, or whatever we had estimated through our desk study was actually confirmed by the site investigation. But this is always a risk that when the site investigation does not happen when you are actually building a project. So in summary, I hope through this example, I have shown you that this earthquake, which had a devastating effect of 8,000 hectares of land, which was left non-irrigable, and 5,000 farmers were without access to irrigation water, through the Gumbasa rehabilitation project and through using this build back better approach, we have worked on this project, which is a national strategic project. And through the use of geotextile layers, which is still a very sustainable solution, we increase the shear resistance and increase factor of safety in an earthquake. So essentially the ability of the soil to slide is decreased to a certain extent, but of course it does not give, if there is a very big event, like for example with the PGA of about 1G or something like that, perhaps the solution will not work. But that's the decision that we need to say, we protect it for 70–80% of the time. And then there is an odd event where such things might happen. Lining, we also suggested that the canal is lined, and also excavation of previously stepped areas until the shear surface is exposed, and reusing of materials. So these are different. And then we went back to the UN Sustainable Goals and said, which of these goal numbers are we sort of hitting? So this story, this example, and this is just, the project is very current. Actually, the last report was just issued just this month. So the whole of this project was delivered during COVID time. So this is just an example that the world did not stop while COVID struck. People continued with their work. So essentially now comes the question that how can you contribute? How can you contribute as an engineer in sustainable development? I've got 3 different ideas which I think I should just let all students know. First is understanding carbon. Carbon, embodied carbon, every civil engineering activity has a certain amount of carbon associated with it. And this should become a part of what is taught in universities, understanding, calculating carbon, calculating the embodied carbon. So that's, if it's not taught in your university, you can always use the web. There's lots of information about it. Understanding materials. What type of materials do you specify? Which kind of has a low impact, which are sustainable? And trying to find alternatives. It's the question, it's the mindset we need to change. And then think about social outcomes. Whatever you're doing as an engineer, that particular project should have some social outcome. Let's not do it just for the sake of, this is a job which I have to do and let's do it. Let's think about some social outcomes and to see how you can change the way what society is doing for us, and how your role as an engineer has an important aspect to that. I'm just giving you an example from about alternate materials, which I talked about. A lot of my colleagues, they talk about this kind of the plastic road company, which is, you can find this company, you can use waste plastics, you can have granulate mixed, you can have enhanced asphalt. This is very, very important in the highways sector, where people are always trying. Perhaps in the civil engineering industry, we are not that experimental, but I have been looking at some recent research, which is called green concrete. And there's some work that's going on in making sure that the concrete is green, and we use and we recycle the materials that we use. That should become a part of our thinking process when we deliver any project. Now, this is a fact. Cement causes approximately 10% of the world's carbon dioxide emissions. and we cannot hide away from this. There's been a lot of talk about how do we do that, and you've seen it in the COP seminar in Glasgow about causing climate, how is contributing to climate change. And as engineers of tomorrow, you have the biggest challenge that the current engineers will face in future is related to climate change threats. And India being the country which is going to be affected by climate change, I really worry, and I hope all engineers really think about combating climate change through our work, through the work that you do. So what should you do? Actually, I think as you are in your career, you should be aware of what you're learning and why you are learning it, what's the reason why you're learning it. You can connect with your alumni, use LinkedIn, use all the social, there are lots of people in LinkedIn who are happy to provide advice. We may all be very busy, but we are still available to, I always respond to students from India when they ask me something, provide some evidence, provide some guidance, whatever, connect with your local alumni. And finally, be proud to be an engineer, because you are actually, your work is making changes in society, and you are actually contributing to good social outcomes. So with that, I think that's perhaps my last slide. I am happy to, I hope you found it useful. There are a lot of other technical issues around this project which I can discuss, but I think with that I will thank you for listening to me, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to, and I hope I've kept in time. Yeah, okay. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to take it forward.
Thank you, Dr. Barnali, for interesting presentation. Also, some good advices for students, actually. Now we will take, I request to the participants to put the question, ask the questions in the chat box. There are a few questions. First question from Dr. Sunil Basarkar. He is one of the leader in DFII India. His question is, just 1 minute.
Yeah, so I can read the question. It says,
Yeah.
Palu case is a showcase of worst disaster due to liquefaction and tsunamis. What could be a possible way to mitigate the fatalities, loss of property and ecosystem? So as I explained to you it's a very complex case, because the problem in this is after the earthquake, if you now go and look at the water table is about 12 meters below. We had piezometers in sight, and when we looked at the piezometers readings, the water table is very low. So you can just go back and say, this is the first case I have ever seen where after an earthquake, the water table has not recovered back to its original position. And one of the things is with the water table going down, perhaps you tend to think that, okay, if the ground is not saturated, you don't have a liquefaction problem. But is this something and one of the reasons for this is it's a complex, geologically very complicated, mainly because of alluvial fans, and you have a water table at artisan water pressures. So this were all trapped below the ground, and the second layer of it burst. So how can you, one of the possible ways of doing that is some work that we are doing in Indonesia, in Surabaya, where we are working on a sort of introducing a sort of disaster-induced insurance. Can people take? I mean, there are two different strings to this. One is the engineering aspect of it, and second is the finance aspect of it. Obviously, as engineering aspect, as you understand the ground more, introduce all the things that you need to do for liquefaction assessment in your design. As I showed you an example of what we've done, there are other different aspects which people can do. And the second is, of course, introducing the knowledge and the insurance, so that if such a thing happens, loss of property happens, you don't come to a situation where you have for 3 or 4 years, you're just in that where the farmers have not been able to irrigate at all. So these are, I hope that answers your question. This will need effort from every aspect. We need to involve the government. We need to, and in this project in Indonesia, this was my first experience with government irrigation department being involved in trying to find a solution. And obviously the loan from Asian Development Bank obviously helped the project.
Next question from Stephanie. In your proposed geotechnical solution using geotextiles, would not the resistance to new slip plains in the upper reaches be augmented with the use of mix of micropiles and many?
Yes. One of the things which we are very keen was to use some of micropiles as well as mini piling, and in addition to that, stone columns. We were we really wanted to use stone columns, but what happened was, as I said, it's sometimes solutions have to be not just technical. There's a lot of what happened at that time. Before the earthquake, there was a site in the same stretch where they were doing some ground improvement with stone columns. And at the earthquake, obviously it was a very big earthquake, so the stone columns got destroyed. So the province was very much against stone columns, and they would not listen to us when we said that they said no stone columns. But I completely agree with you, and that's why one of our recommendations, what we have recommended, which I didn't talk about, is actually a lot of monitoring to INSAR and others, because the ground is not only because of the earthquake, the way the geology of the ground is that there is some movement in the ground even before the earthquake. So it was just sitting at the point where it was about to hit the shear stress. A little bit of kick just started it. So hopefully one of the biggest questions in our mind was 5 kilometers of the channel. Is there other parts of the canal where such a failure can occur? What we've seen in the 3 locations, are there other parts of the canal? And we did a risk assessment for the entire canal, and we did find, we have now zoned it. We've kind of said that these are the other areas which also need similar remediation. So you are absolutely right that it would have been useful. I mean, I was always in favor of augmenting it with other forms of this, micropiles, mini piling, all of this would work.
In India, everyone asked to use stone columns for liquefaction mitigation.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a question, as I said, it's a question of country, context, everything. There's local, because of the local experience with the bad performance of stone columns, they were just very, very reluctant to use stone columns. We still left it as an option.
2 more questions, one more.
What would be the ground rule to make resilient structures as we are seeing overcrowded construction activities? The ground rule to advise government to make resilient is around, this is a different type of, it's not really always what I have learned in this project it's not always the technical. It's also how you communicate the technical. Because sometimes the problem with a lot of us who are working on technical field, we forget the art of communication. So I think the governments have to be, you have to speak to government in sort of steps which they can do. If you make very big lofty plans that by 2022, no structure will collapse due to earthquake or things like that, nobody takes it. You have to do, just did a city resilient plan in Surabaya where we broke it down into very small terms, some short-term gains, medium-term gains, and longer-term gains. And that way we could actually help the government. You have to take the government on a journey with you. And you need for that competent leaders from the engineering community who can actually understand the wider context. And I think there's lots of us who are just very good, we're just very good engineers, but we're not really very good at communicating what we do. So that's a very good question, Chintan.
There is another question from Stephanie.
From an engineering viewpoint, you believe soil improvement, the construction that can resist more than rigid earthquake? Am I being no? You're not being simplistic. That was one of the reasons why we did not opt for the structural solution, actually, because as I said, from the solutions, our belief is soil improvement. Mainly, we wanted to introduce a bit of ductility in the system so that failure, it should not be a sudden failure like what happened at that time. So just introducing a bit of ductility, making it a more flexible solution, that's kind of what the aim was, rather than just making a rigid system. So yes, guys, you're not being oversimplistic about it at all.
Another question from Christy.
Yes, what's the Brishti, that's your question, is what are the parameters that should be considered to make a lesser earthquake prone zone safe from future uncertain calamities like the parameters that should be considered is obviously, first of all, have a good understanding of the hazard that's occurring in a site. For example, if you are in India, you have the seismic map and seismic hazard, good understanding of the locations and the risks and particular structure that you are building. For example, if you are building an underground structure, like it can be an underground metro stations, as you're aware, in India, there's lots of underground metro stations. And in underground metro stations, the kind of damage that happens in the earthquake is from ground deformations. This is different than the kind of damage that happens from an overground structure, which is, for example, a 10-story building. For a 10-story building, it's going to be affected more by the inertia of the structure. So we have to understand the fundamental mechanisms that's causing the damage. And then obviously the parameters is your seismic hazard, your type of foundations, your type of ground conditions. All of this will make a sustainable design. You have to understand, and also the interaction. So for example, if I am a geotechnical engineer, I have to understand, I have to have some understanding about the structure. I cannot just say I'm a geotechnical engineer and I only see what is below the ground. I have to understand the interaction that my structure has with the ground. Thank you for your question.
Question from Vivek. Have you observed any existing geosynthetic failure in Palu quake?
Yes, I mean, I did. We from what we looked at the canal, I'm not sure about other facilities, but for the canal areas that we looked at, we did not see any. What we also did was, not only have we just lined the canal, but also we put a layer of geotextiles after that as well in the canal lining as well. And that's just to help with seepage and give it a little bit. We were just trying to make the system more flexible. So we've not observed, I'm going to go and look at it because it's possible that there was any which we didn't see. As I said, one of our main difficulties was the inability to travel and, look at, I believe when the site investigation was happening, I did look at a lot of that through video, but it's not the same for a geotechnical engineer if you're not able to touch the soil and see what it looks like. So I was always asking for pictures on the site.
Another question from Thomas. The proposed solution was the facilitation of any additional repairs, strengthening works due to potential future damages was taken into consideration.
Yeah, proposed was the facilitation of any additional repair, strengthening work, damages. Additional repair, strengthening works was, as I said, we also looked at not just these 3 areas where we had the liquefaction failure, but there were some other areas which we also identified were susceptible. This was mainly because of the way the location was, the alluvial fans in the region, the soil in that particular region. So in the solution, what we have suggested, a general strengthening along these other parts as well. And one of the other solutions, as I said, was monitoring, because I think this is quite a valuable site to monitor. And these days, instrumentation, the use of INSAR and other databases, it's much easier to do this compared to what was happening in the past.
Barnali, I have one question. In India, extensively using stone columns in subclays as well as in granular materials. Can we treat the stone column also as a vertical drains?
Sorry, what did you say? Can you treat
the stone column as a vertical drains?
Vertical drains, okay. I mean,
in some projects they are doing piling. Between the piling, they are doing stone columns mainly to reduce the pore pressure buildup.
Yeah, but then again, you are more worried. If you're thinking from earthquake point of view, you're more worried about what's the horizontal deformations and the pore pressure. I mean, if they can help in drainage, I'm sure We have specified a lot of stone columns in many parts of the world, and it seems to work. It's a solution which works. It's just in this particular project, we had a bit of a challenge and obviously a project of this importance, which I would sit in meetings in Indonesia where there is about 30 to 35 local experts. Because in Indonesia, as you know, the earthquake engineering community is very, very strong. And from all of this, everyone has an opinion. One of the biggest challenges, how do you propose a solution which 35 world experts agree? So that's another challenge with too many. So I definitely think that what you said, that saying if you can use it for vertical drainage, I don't see any reason why not.
Thank you, Dr. Barnali, for accepting for this presentation. On behalf of DFII India, I thank you once again.
Yes, I think there is a question here which we missed from Stefan. Yes.
We have time. We are crossing down time. That's why I didn't take up.
That's fine. I could get in touch to connect with me on LinkedIn, because that's
any other questions? We will forward you.
Okay. Thank you. So I'm glad it was all in time.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Barnali?
Yes, you can see my screen.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Sure. So we thank you, Barnali ma'am. Thank you so much for this interesting presentation, and gladly accepting our invitation to come on board for this groundwork webinar too. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I hope the students found it useful.
Any remarks from your end, Professor Bhuminathan, before we close this webinar?
Yeah, I also thank you for DFII India giving me a chance to coordinate this webinar. And I think our students' questions are very valuable questions, and also Dr. Barnali answered all the questions. Okay, with that, I will close this.
Thank you so much, Professor Bhuminathan. And before closing this webinar, I'll just like to give you of the updates about our upcoming webinar. So in this groundwork webinar series, webinar 3 will be conducted on 15th March at 5 to 6 p.m. Indian time. And that will be on case histories of Deep Foundation for Tower M, that is a part of Kuala Lumpur City Center Tower, and also one from New York City, the skyscraper, and that will be presented by Mr. Seth Martin from Langen. And again, webinar 4 will come up within April. So we hope to see you all again in these webinars. And as you may already know, DFII India has already published call for abstract for its 2022 annual conference, and the deadline is 19th February, that is by the end of this week. So I request you all, if you want to submit any technical paper, you kindly submit your abstract. After this webinar, you all will receive a mail from our end to submit your feedback, and I'll make sure to attach this link also if you would like to submit your abstract. There are multiple topics. You can choose any topic and you can submit your paper. And on 25th and 26th February, we also have one training program on reverse circulation drilling, RCD technology. Many international and national experts will be getting together for this course. It will cover all the aspects of the RCD technology, right from introduction, proposal tendering, project execution, decommissioning, transportation, storage, QA/QC, benefits limitation, followed by question and answer session. So we look forward to your participation in this program also. You'll receive a link from our site to register, or you can go to DFII website and register for this program too. So thank you so much, Dr. Barnali, Professor Bhuminathan, and all the attendees for making this program successful. And I wish you all the best, and we'll see you around. Thank you so much.